I'm dumb. I should stop opening my mouth.
Trigger warning! This video will contain a lot of unnecessary slurs and bigotry as I'm addressing a bad person.
I feel like there's a lot worse you could do. There's a lot worse you could do. As in, like, literally any toucan. Hang out with literally any guy with a big hook nose, that's probably a bigger stain to your reputation, to me, at least.
It would be way too easy and boring to explain why it's factually and morally wrong to be a literal Nazi, as any person with a functioning brain naturally understands this. So, instead of opening that can of worms, I'm going to focus more on his stance towards Dark Souls 2 and also on the weird correlation between the far right and DS2 hate. But, to be fair, the hate is more applicable to people like Ass Goonmold, because Synthetic Man is not an outright hater.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even hate Dark Souls 2 at all, but I feel like pretending that the bad parts are good is what makes you look dumb, you know what I mean? Like, you can't do that. You can't do that. You have to acknowledge the flaws and just say, I like it anyway.
Okay, so now you're probably wondering what he said that hurt Domo's feelings.
Rage bait, more like band bait, or brown. Yeah, it's like, who cares, like another example, okay, the Lost Sinner, right? You light up the flames in the room so that you have longer lock-on range, okay. But that boss would be a complete joke if it didn't have broken hitboxes.
There are a lot of bosses in the series that have actually broken hitboxes. But Lost Sinner, seriously? She doesn't even register on my bad hitbox radar. So no, I won't be
Pretending that the bad parts are good.
But I will be pointing out that Dark Souls 2 gets judged much harsher than the other entries in the series. And now, without further ado, let us jump right into the video. But first, a word from my sponsor, Majestic. Hey, you, gamer. Are you tired of winning? Is rolling too easy for you? Try flipping instead. For the low price of having to deal with Maldron, you can get yourself a Majestic greatsword from Broom Tower. This sword was passed down through generations of mighty warriors that cared more about looking stylish than actually dealing meaningful damage. Yeah, I guess I won't have to tell you that this isn't actually a sponsored segment, but just an excuse to show off some Dark Souls 2 hitboxes. People just like to glaze the hitboxes in the other entries while shitting on those in DS2, even though they are all roughly on the same level of quality. But even okay hitboxes in DS2 get more negative attention than bad ones in the other FromSoft games.
That boss has, like, some of the worst hitboxes in the entire franchise, probably.
No, and it's not even close to some of the worst hitboxes.
Where it'll poke forward with a sword, and it hits you like 3 times the width of the sword or more. Like, it looks comically bad.
As usual, Dark Souls 2 gets accused of having
some of the worst hitboxes in the entire franchise,
despite the hitbox in question looking exactly the same way as almost every other thrust attack in FromSoft history. All of them extend like a foot around the sword and are usually like a foot longer as well. The only difference is that people just ignore it if the air around the weapon damages them in the other Souls games, but hyper-analyze it if it happens in DS2. At the beginning of this video I mentioned that I will also be addressing the weird connection between far-right ideology and DS2 hate. Here is a very unscientific chart about something you've probably already noticed. DS2 defenders tend to be on the political left, like me and H-Bomber-Guy, while DS2 hate usually comes from the right, like Mauler and Ass to Mouth. Warning. The following chapter will contain scientific facts, so if you are a conservative, please leave this video now, as these facts will certainly hurt your feelings. On average, conservatives are simple-minded. They don't like thinking. They struggle with ambiguity and are afraid of uncertainty. Right-wingers generally don't understand nuance and prefer oversimplified, dumbed-down answers. That's also why they rely on stereotypes so much to categorize people into nice little boxes. They don't have to use their brain to analyze individual people, they can just look at their skin color to determine if they are good or bad.
I know it might be hard. No one wants to admit. They don't want to talk about genetics. They don't want to talk about any of that stuff. But maybe, just maybe, there might be a racial component. Possibly. It's possible. You might have to consider that. You might have to consider that possibly. I have to say, I know that's hard. You know, if you're black, you don't want to say like, okay, you know, maybe my people are retarded.
You might be wondering how being simple-minded and relying too much on stereotypes ties into TS2 hate, but that's exactly why people hyperfocus so much on bad hitboxes in Dark Souls 2 while ignoring actually bad ones in the other Souls games. When the game was released, many people played with low ADP and got the false impression that the hitboxes are bad, and so this misconception spread around.
This study found that, as hypothesized, Republicans held more negative stereotypical views of many stigmatized groups. This finding held across 4 different operationalizations of negative stereotypes: modern sexism, modern racism, negative feelings, and intelligence ratings of social groups.
The fact that conservatives rely a lot more on stereotypes shouldn't be surprising in the slightest, as everyone should be aware that right-wingers are usually racist, sexist, and homophobic.
High political conservatism is associated with preferences for stability, conformity, tradition, and order and structure. Conservative people eschew ambiguity and disorganization and prefer closure and limited shades of gray.
Conservatives tend to be bad at handling nuance and are afraid of anything that doesn't fit into their preconceived notions, which also makes them react more negatively to anything that goes against their stereotypes.
Conservatives are not only more likely to use stereotypes than are liberals, but are especially likely to negatively evaluate counter-stereotypical people to organize the social world with greater certainty.
The participants of this study were asked how much they liked a person based on a picture and short description. Unsurprisingly, conservatives gave lower ratings to gay men, but even lower ratings to masculine-looking gay men. They expect gay men to look feminine, so if they don't fit into that mold, it triggers conservatives as they have a strong need to make everything fit into strict categories. It's the same with TS2. They were conditioned to believe that all the hitboxes are broken, so they will pay a lot more attention to bad hitboxes, but will also react negatively if a boss doesn't give them the feeling that their prejudices hold true.
Lower levels of abstract reasoning predicted prejudice, and also greater right-wing authoritarianism, which in turn predicted elevated prejudice against homosexuals.
There are now probably a few outraged conservatives in the comments that are angry that I'm pointing out the fact that they are right-wingers because of their lowered cognitive abilities, but guys, I gave you a trigger warning and you still decided to let yourself get exposed to scientific facts that hurt your feelings.
Political conservatives are more likely to interpret, attend to, remember, and respond to negative aspects of environmental stimuli, especially if they are novel and different. Liberal people tolerate ambiguity and disorganization and favor flexibility in taking on cognitive conflicts.
Right-wingers have less mental flexibility than those on the left and are much more likely to fall victim to confirmation bias. If they hear that Dark Souls 2 is the worst, they will subconsciously look for justifications for the stereotypes, while those on the left will jump into the game with a much more open mind and come to their own conclusions.
High political liberalism, in contrast, is associated with preferences for creativity, curiosity, novelty-seeking, and new experiences.
The fact that conservatives dislike change, while liberals are curious and seek new experiences, also explains so much about why any small change to the Souls formula is evaluated so negatively by some, but appreciated by others.
Like, I've probably played the game more than you, and I've definitely played more video games than you, and I'm definitely smarter than you. So you should probably sit down and listen. I'm just saying.
Is he really smarter? I don't know. Who knows? For all we know, he could just be suffering from conservative syndrome that falsely makes him feel smarter than others as a coping mechanism for low intelligence.
Conservative ideology represents a critical pathway through which childhood intelligence predicts racism in adulthood. In psychological terms, the relation between intelligence and prejudice may stem from the propensity of individuals with lower cognitive ability to endorse more right-wing conservative ideologies because such ideologies offer a psychological sense of stability and order. By emphasizing resistance to change and inequality among groups, these ideologies legitimize and promote negative evaluations of outgroups.
I'm not saying that this is definitely true for everyone on the right, but it certainly explains why half of all conservatives believe that Trump is a genius for being just as smart as they themselves are.
Those who performed worse on objective numeracy tasks scored higher on right-wing authoritarianism. Those who strongly endorsed right-wing ideologies believed they are good with numbers yet performed worse on numeracy tasks. In other words, people's beliefs about their ability, beyond effects of their actual ability, accompanied endorsement of right-wing ideologies and self-placement as politically conservative. These findings present the possibility that, on average, those who are right or conservative-leaning might overestimate their numerical abilities, despite performing no better or somewhat worse than their left-leaning counterparts.
Whenever someone on the right insists that they are smart, I'm thinking of this study. They will tell you that they are above average in math, despite their test scores saying otherwise.
In 2 analyses, we found consistent evidence that lower cognitive ability and greater self-efficacy is associated with greater political conservatism.
Now, let us listen to him talk about the study.
Oh, yeah, this study. Yeah, I remember the study. Hold on, let's go back.
As fears of a blood and soil nationalist, as a leftist obsessed with some post-colonial backwards people group from the third world, of course Palestine being the crowning jewel.
Yeah, so, I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily confirms, like, what he's saying about leftists being more nationalistic. It's more like leftists will care about complete strangers that they're told are oppressed, other than their own goddamn families, which is like, literally, that is a death cult. You know, they've described leftism as a death cult.
You might have seen these heat maps in some memes like this here. But first, let us remember that
Conservatives had higher subjective numeracy but lower objective scores.
this isn't limited to mathematical skills. Apparently, conservatives are also unable to read. In this study, people were asked to select the number that corresponds to the extent of their morality. If you select the middle, you care only about your own family, but if you select the outermost circle, you care about all things in existence. If you read what these heat maps are about, it's pretty obvious what they actually show, but conservatives aren't interested in science. They do not care what this study says, as they just assume that they already understand it perfectly.
That is death cult behavior. I don't give a fuck about, you know, my brother's sister, parents, any of my blood relatives at all. But this brown guy in another country, I'm going to go like protest in the streets for him. It's like, yeah, that's death cult. 100%.
If any sane, rational, or just normal person sees a study that seems to imply that liberals care more about random cats than their own family, that person would question if they misunderstood the study, as that clearly makes no sense. But as the simple brain of conservatives lacks the necessary mental development, curiosity and intelligence for critical thought, they just believe anything that allows them to justify their hate. They just believe anything that allows them to justify their hate. Based on the way the question was worded, caring if something happens to any animal explicitly covers caring about your own family. So the actual conclusion should be that conservatives barely care if something bad happens to anyone that isn't part of their community, while liberals do. It's a huge misunderstanding to conclude that it shows that liberals do not care about their own family, but remember,
Our findings contribute to a growing body of research that suggests a linear relationship between greater conservatism versus liberalism and lower cognitive ability but higher self-confidence. Our results suggest that conservatives may suffer a triple burden. First, they are more susceptible to the most viral misinformation. Second, conservatives' reported confidence is less informative about when they are right or wrong, both overall and especially for discordant statements. Thus, generally lower metacognitive sensitivity for detecting political misinformation among the political right is alarming, as they are not only exposed to more low-quality articles, but also confidently share them at higher rates.
Yeah, this study also explains so much about the tendency of conservatives to just blindly believe any absurd statement that makes liberals seem bad.
Third, conservatives are markedly less efficient in using their awareness of their own cognitive processes to judge discordant statements. In other words, conservatives struggle to use internal evidence to inform their metacognition when the information in question is at odds with their political views. Republicans and conservatives, but not Democrats and liberals, exhibited metacognitive blind spots for statements that challenged their ideological commitments. A rich history of research has demonstrated the importance of metacognition for learning and belief updating. If people are unaware that they are wrong, they may not seek further information, thereby remaining misinformed and believing that the other side is wrong.
While we are at the topic of misinformation, have you ever noticed that conservatives seem to think that empirical studies are just as valuable and trustworthy as gut feelings?
We wanted to specifically measure the extent to which people think that gut feelings and intuitions have an unshakable truth and should be considered on an equal or greater level with objective facts.
The results are really not surprising at all.
As hypothesized, compared to liberals, conservatives evaluate the science rejecter more favorably. We also found that conservatives also evaluated the researcher less favorably than liberals. Both liberals and conservatives tend to evaluate the researcher more positively than the rejecter on average, though conservatives tend to see them as closer in legitimacy. Given conservatives' clear tendency to see scientific and experiential evidence as closer in legitimacy than liberals, the idea that the two are equally biased on average, at least in the realm of attitudes towards science, seems increasingly untenable. The desire of conservatives to hear both sides might additionally stem from honest beliefs that non-scientific anecdotal evidence is an equally legitimate source of truth as scientific evidence.
Unsurprisingly, the people that shout the loudest that facts do not care about feelings do not care about facts. Conservatives generally do not care about science unless it's a study that they can use as political ammunition, even if they have to leave out key details.
There's been a study performed a few years back that showed that right-wingers, despite being seen as close-minded and xenophobic, possess a greater diversity of opinion than leftists.
On first glance, I would just assume that this study showed that conservatives tend to have fringe beliefs because they trust religious fanatics and conspiracy theorists more than scientific facts. They are guided by feelings, but not by logic.
Political liberalism and conservatism were correlated with brain structure. Liberalism was associated with greater gray matter volume of anterior cingulate cortex. Individuals with a larger ACC have a higher capacity to tolerate uncertainty and conflicts, allowing them to accept more liberal views. Conservatism was associated with increased right amygdala size. Individuals with a large amygdala are more sensitive to fear and disgust.
Conservatives tend to be unable to cope with deviations from the norm, which, along with religious beliefs, could cause them to be disgusted by LGBT people. But if one of their family members gets brave enough to come out as LGBT, right-wingers reach a crossroad. Some stay true to their hateful feelings and kick them out of their house, while others suddenly become pro-LGBT as they feel empathy for them for the first time. So I feel like any question that's about religious beliefs versus scientific facts will have strong liberal agreement. I would guess that the results of this study highly depend on what kind of questions you ask. Now, with that said, let us take a look at the study. Abortion, income equality, immigrants, welfare, LGBT rights, environmental protections, Second Amendment, DEI. These are all highly divisive political topics. Democrats have strong agreement that abortion should be legal, that LGBT people should be allowed to marry, and that the government should help African Americans more. Conservatives are similar in how they feel about gun rights, income equality and sending unauthorized immigrants home, which also have less agreement among Democrats. Conservatives are split on abortion rights, LGBT marriage and environmental protections. I think the results wouldn't have been so drastic if there had been more questions about state rights, death penalty, drug policies or taxes. Or even questions about topics that aren't politically charged, like taste in music and art. But did you see what I did here? Instead of accepting the results of a study, I looked for reasons to dismiss it. Instead of acknowledging the underlying premise that Democrats have more similar views on various political topics. That's a common pitfall. Okay, this political chapter has been going on for quite some time, so here's something more fun instead.
Kickstarter regret story is the Dark Souls board game. Oh my god, he did that like, oh lord, no. What the fuck? Oh my god, what the fuck, dude? Okay, hold on. Did Dark Souls Remastered change how the enemy aggression works? Because I'm like 99% sure I've done that exact thing before. Like literally, I've hit one, only aggroed one, hit another one, only aggroed another. I swear to you, I've done that before.
It's clunky as the aggro when you get close enough to hit him, so you have to wait for him to turn around. But I noticed some funny AI while testing this, so I'll take this moment for some clarifications. I used this video to let off a bit of steam by presenting conservatives in a very negative light. But remember that reality isn't as black and white as I presented it here. Obviously, not all of them are dumb, ignorant and bigoted, but I wanted to highlight how bad their over-reliance on stereotypes is by stereotyping them. I just gave them a taste of their own medicine, but if you are on the left, please don't start to hate them as much as they hate you. They often don't act like it, but they are human beings with feelings.
Liberals and conservatives exhibit different cognitive styles, and converging lines of evidence suggest that biology influences differences in their political attitudes and beliefs. Republicans more strongly activate their right amygdala, associated with orienting attention to external cues and fear. Democrats have higher activity in their left posterior insula, associated with perceptions of internal physiological states. The insula cortex is vital for theory of mind, or the perception of others as thinking entities. These results suggest that liberals and conservatives engage different cognitive processes when they think about risk, and they support recent evidence that conservatives show greater sensitivity to threatening stimuli.
Remember, these are all just trends. I'm not saying that you should stereotype all conservatives and all Democrats in a certain way, but that we should acknowledge that in general different thinking styles explain the divide between the different political sides. All in all, I would summarize this chapter as an explanation why Dark Souls 2 hate primarily comes from the right, even though it's not even close to being a political topic. But those different thinking styles explain why conservatives that dislike change and are more susceptible to believing in negative stereotypes are less likely to enjoy DS2, while liberals that use their brain and curiosity to creatively handle challenges are more likely to have fun.
I miss level design like this, where you have like this narrow staircase and like you can fuck with the enemy AI, you know what I mean? Makes you feel intelligent. I feel smart. But they don't really make, like, if you look at the level design in the later Souls games, they don't really do super narrow hallways. Because they want you to fight every enemy the way that the developers intended, which is boring.
If he really is as smart as he claims, he should have noticed that almost every so-called random-ass gang squad encounter encourages out-of-the-box thinking to handle it in a smart way. Sadly, I couldn't find any stream of him playing this game, so I can't verify how much creative thought he puts into dealing with encounters.
This area is good, you know, out of like the 4 areas, you know, they're clearly not all finished. But this one's good. Am I even gonna make it up this? Ow, ow, ow. Ow, ow. Ow. Go! Go, dude!
If his Dark Souls 2 gameplay is in any way similar to his DS1 gameplay, we can safely assume that he regularly tries to rush through areas as soon as they become a little bit difficult. As far as I can tell from watching gameplay footage of other streamers, blindly rushing through new areas to greedily pick up items is the primary cause of getting swarmed with enemies. This game highly encourages creativity as there are so many encounters where you can
Fuck with the enemy AI, you know what I mean?
Okay, so how does he feel about the enemy encounters in Dark Souls 2?
Dark Souls 1 boss is just as easy as Dark Souls 2. That's not even true, though. That's not true. That is just not true at all. The only reason you even think that is because I had an overpowered weapon from very early on in the game. And could kill, like, everything in 5 hits. Yeah, Dark Souls 2 is the easiest one. The only things that are hard in Dark Souls 2 are the random-ass gank squad encounters, of which there's like 100. Which is very annoying.
As expected, he had issues with the enemy placements. But from watching his DS1 gameplay footage, that's really no surprise, as he seems to focus primarily on defeating bosses instead of immersing himself in the world. But let me move on to the next topic. Did you notice how he disagreed with the assessment that Dark Souls 1 bosses are just as easy as those in DS2? The next chapter is about him complaining that Dark Souls 2 is bad because the bosses are too easy and don't have as many gimmicks as the bosses in DS1 did.
But just being like, oh yeah, Dark Souls 2 is the best one. Why? I don't know, because every boss is a complete fucking joke. Has like 2 moves, dies in 5 seconds, and they're not memorable at all. Because at least in Dark Souls 1, even when I had my overpowered Black Knight Halberd, I feel like half the bosses at least have a unique gimmick. The Dark Souls 2 bosses are, here's a guy with a big halberd, he stands in a circle, you can literally walk around him and he can't hit you.
By complaining that you can circle strafe around the potentially first boss, he did a really great job of immediately showing that he's just biased against DS2. And how is the Dragon Rider not memorable? Everyone remembers that cute Chungus. And he also got the gimmick with the lifting platforms that make him stand out.
I get what he's saying, but the problem is the bosses of Dark Souls 2 aren't actually that hard to incentivize you to use the alternative strategies. Yeah, I mean, they're pointless. Like, the way that bosses are unique in Dark Souls 1 is core to how they fight you, right? Like, Taurus Demon, it's on a bridge. There's 2 crossbow guys behind you shooting you. He can knock you off the bridge in one swing, or he could basically bug out and jump off the bridge himself, as you saw when I played. So that memorable fight right there, because of the arena, because of the crossbow guys, because of the fact you can climb up the tower and plunging attack, all those things make it a memorable fight.
This whole argument just seems like more bias. In Dark Souls 2, the gimmicks of the various bosses do not count as he considers them to be too easy to be worth remembering, but the same does not apply to an easy boss like Taurus Demon, who can't even hit you if you simply get close. Lost Sinner is bad because good players do not even need to light up her arena to make it easier, but Taurus Demon is good because bad players could do a plunging attack to make it easier. That's an obvious double standard. But, like the old saying goes, without double standards, conservatives would have no standards at all. Do you remember earlier how I cited a study that showed that liberals rely more on the logic center of their brain, while conservatives rely more on their fear center? This also explains why liberals are less likely to hold conflicting beliefs.
People with liberal views tended to have increased gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, a region of the brain linked to decision-making, in particular when conflicting information is being presented.
Bell gargoyles. There's 2 of them. You know, second one jumps in halfway through the fight. That's extremely memorable. You know, ups the difficulty dramatically. Is, you know, one of the great filters of the game, of course.
And how does he feel about a very similar boss?
There's absolutely quite a few times during Dark Souls 2's levels that it is challenging, but the boss fights are not. The boss fights are not. There's only, you know, a few that are legit hard, like Dark Lurker. Even Dark Lurker, I think I beat it already on stream, didn't I? I think so. When I was streaming through it. It's not even that hard. It's just, I don't know.
Darklurker and the Bell Gargoyles are both relatively hard for new players, but he seems to judge the Gargoyles based on the new player experience, but Darklurker based on how easy it felt on the latest playthrough. He insists over and over that Dark Souls 2 has no memorable bosses as they are all too easy. But I fail to see how they are any easier than DS1 bosses.
They have a unique mechanic that makes them stand out. That gives them a something that'll throw you off and make the fight hard. It's the later in the series that the only way they could think of to make the fights hard is to make it harder to dodge the attacks. That's what ruined the series. Like, even easy bosses like Nito, right? Nito toxics you from across the arena, you know, and he has a unique audio.
He really seems to be
Struggling to even remember Dark Souls 2 bosses right now. I'm racking my brain.
as he seems to bring up the design philosophy of some DS3 and Elden Ring bosses as an argument against Dark Souls 2.
Dark Souls 2 is way more gimmicks and boss than Dark Souls 1. It's actually insane to refer to Dark Souls 1 boss to LMAO. Avalon, literally no one thinks that. Dark Souls 2's bosses you could beat blindfolded with like one arm tied behind your back. Like, what are you talking about? Literally, what are you talking about? This is some retard shit. Like, you get to the level of contrarian where you're just making a fool out of yourself.
And did you pay attention to how often he presents bosses in DS2 as too easy, unlike bosses in Dark Souls 1?
How's your genius argument that Dark Souls 2 bosses are too easy not ring true for Dark Souls 1 bosses? Because Dark Souls 1 bosses aren't too easy, and you're just lying to make your game look better. Both games have gimmicks to their bosses, both are very easy. Are you dumb? Okay, Avalon, do you know what an opinion is? I mean, you probably don't because you're brown. You probably think every thought in your head is a fact.
Here is yet another example.
Dark Souls 2 was agreed by everyone to be either the easiest or second easiest in the series. Dark Souls 1, playing for the first time, is a decent challenge. Different people are challenged by different things, but the bosses actually have variety in their abilities to catch you off guard and kill you even if you're skilled at Souls games, especially because Dark Souls 1 has much more clunky movement and larger hit stun, so it only takes one or two fuck-ups to die, which is easy because of the jankness.
I heavily disagree with that statement, as the bosses in DS2 have more variety in their abilities to catch you off guard. For example, by changing how long they can wind up their attacks or how they extend their combos. Darklurker and Sir Alon are great at catching early panic rolls, as they can change up the wind-up speed of several of their attacks. And Fume Knight here, for example, was the officially deadliest FromSoft boss up to that point, and he also had the highest variety of different combos. But back to the main point. Did you also get the impression that he is arguing that the bosses in Dark Souls 2 are too easy, unlike the bosses in DS1?
I literally just said Dark Souls 1 bosses are hard and Dark Souls 2 bosses are easy. No, I didn't. Clip it. Clip it and send it back to me. I don't think you know what the word literally means. Please, clip where I said Dark Souls 1 bosses are hard and 2 are easy. Go ahead. I didn't say it. Brown's misuse literal all the time. Yeah, maybe he's an ESO. Doesn't know what the word literal means.
Yeah, he is right that he didn't literally say that specific sentence, but can you really blame people for assuming that these are his beliefs, when he just spent several minutes arguing that the bosses are too easy in DS2 but not in DS1?
Dark Souls 1 boss is just as easy as Dark Souls 2. That's not even true, though. That's not true. It's because Dark Souls 1 bosses aren't too easy, and you're just lying to make your game look better. Dark Souls 2's bosses you could beat blindfolded with, like, one arm tied behind your back. Every boss is a complete fucking joke. Has, like, 2 moves, dies in 5 seconds,
He's getting hung up on the word literally, when the point of discussion was that he complained that the bosses in DS2 are bad for being easy without acknowledging, or rather while denying, that the same applies to bosses in DS1 as well.
And it's not hard. You can not light the fires. Who cares if you can only lock on right in front of the thing? You can probably just roll around it and kill it. Like, who gives a fuck? I get what he's saying, but the problem is the bosses of Dark Souls 2 aren't actually that hard to incentivize you to use the alternative strategies. Yeah, I mean, they're pointless.
Okay, now I've managed to loop around. Back to the beginning, where he complained about the lost sinner. He argues that the gimmick of lighting up the arena is pointless, as she is too easy.
The gimmicks are pointless if they serve no purpose to the boss.
This is just yet another bad take. Right-wingers tend to be blind to their own privileges. Lost Sinner was easy for him, but it's like he can't even imagine that other people can't spend half the day playing video games. Let us take a look at another streamer, Breivik fan Anders Nordic.
Oh shit.
In case you didn't know, yeah, Mongler really named one of his World of Warcraft characters after famous neo-Nazi mass murderer Anders Breivik. But let's ignore how much their views on Muslims align and focus on Lost Sinner instead. Even though he also spent most of the best years of his life sitting alone at home playing video games, it took him several tries to beat her. If she really was as easy as Synthetic Man claims, this should have been an easy first try kill.
I can't target him. I can't target the boss. I can't see what's happening, like...
So much for the gimmick being utterly pointless. But here is yet another example.
They're fucking fast. Wait, their hands are freaking... Oh. Jill, hey Jill!
She's a newcomer to the series, so I'm going to use her as an example of just how hard this supposedly way too easy boss can be. Lost Sinner is one of the first bosses in this game where circle strafing doesn't trivialize it anymore. She went in with 73 total deaths so far.
No. No. Yes! Girl in the tower! Oh my god!
27 attempts later, Courtney finally beat her. Bitter people like Synthetic Man are now probably going to make her a misogynistic joke, even though he probably struggled more than he likes to admit, considering that he was frustrated enough to complain about the hitboxes.
Come on! What is the hitbox? What is that hitbox? Girl in the hitbox.
It took her 11 attempts before she first complained about bad hitboxes, despite being clearly hit in the foot.
She's so good! She's good at the video game! Oh my god, the hitbox is the size of New Jersey! The hitbox is as long as the Florida Turnpike!
It really seems like people just like to blame hitboxes when they struggle with a boss.
Okay, that was crazy. Say what you want, but she's really sick with it. Oh my god, the hitbox defies space and time! The hitbox is all around you. It exists, but it doesn't.
Foot.
The fact that she complains about broken hitboxes despite being clearly hit in the foot reminded me of someone else that started to do the same when he struggled with this boss. It's so easy to blame hitboxes rather than blaming your own dodging skills.
The first torture experiment I faced was the Lost Sinner. Usually not a bad boss, but at level 1 this woman's stab hitbox is way too big. I had 9 iframes for this fight, but I recommend anyone else doing a level 1 run to get to the max of 10 before attempting this bullcrap. Rolling sideways usually doesn't seem to work because the hitbox was actually that ginormous, so my best strategy is to roll forward diagonal extremely close to the boss at the last possible second to avoid the giant stab hitbox. It's also really hard to find healing windows against Lost Sinner.
This really seems to be a common theme. Just blame the hitboxes if you fail over and over to beat this way too easy boss. Her gimmick is obviously not useless either, as many people lose track of her, and she clearly is memorable with her presentation and fast attack style. That was all just bias against Dark Souls 2 from someone that's just filled with biases. Thanks for sticking around, and have fun watching me fail to defeat this pushover of a boss.